Maplewood Heights looked like any other planned neighborhood in the suburbs, freshly cut lawns, pastel shutters, slow-moving golf carts. But behind those white fences were more than garden gnomes and flower beds. There was control. Control disguised as community. And at the heart of that control was the HOA. And at the heart of the HOA was Karen Witherspoon. Karen didn't just live in the neighborhood, she monitored it. Morning binocular sweeps from the upstairs bay window were part of her routine. Todd, her husband, had long stopped asking why. Today, she stood frozen as 3 sleek black vehicles rolled slowly up the road and parked across the street, at the corner house recently bought by a man named Ethan Rivers. Karen hadn't quite figured Ethan out. He'd moved in quietly 3 weeks ago. No welcome party, no lawn signs, no attending HOA meetings. Yet now, a private driveway gathering was unfolding right under her nose. The men in suits exited the cars. First, tall, sharp, one of them even opened a rear door like he was trained to. Out stepped a woman in a silk scarf and heels that didn't belong anywhere near freshly laid mulch. Another man followed, broad, quiet, with a presence that unsettled even from a distance. Ethan appeared at the top of his porch, calm as a monk, welcoming them inside like it was just Sunday brunch. Karen narrowed her eyes. This doesn't look like family, she muttered to herself. Todd, halfway through his bagel, barely looked up. Maybe it's just a dinner party. She ignored him, grabbed her phone, and opened the HOA group chat. Her fingers moved fast. Suspicious gathering at 402 Maple. 3 unmarked black sedans. Unknown visitors, will investigate. Within minutes, her inbox pinged with responses. Keep us updated, sounds fishy. Could be political. Karen's heart picked up pace. She'd seen enough crime dramas to know this is how it started. Quiet neighbor, fancy guests, something hidden, and if the HOA board wouldn't act, she would. She slipped on her shoes and walked straight over. No invitation, no hesitation. The air smelled like rosemary and steak. Soft jazz spilled out from Ethan's backyard. Karen didn't knock, she peeked through the side fence. That's when she saw the flagrant white and green, embroidered on a cloth resting on the shoulder of the elegant woman. Not a fashion accessory, a symbol. Karen's eyebrows rose. She stepped back and reached for her phone again. This time, she didn't text. She dialed 911. What's your emergency? I need to report a possible unregistered gathering, she said, carefully choosing her words. There may be unauthorized foreign officials in a private residence. No HOA notification was given. The dispatcher paused. Foreign officials. Karen squinted through the fence again. Yes, I believe they might be diplomats. Or spies. Possibly both. As she hung up, she stood straighter, already imagining the moment the cruisers arrived, lights flashing, order restored. She'd be the one who protected Maplewood. But inside the house, Ethan poured wine for his guests and smiled. She saw the cars. Ambassador Imani nodded. She peeked through the fence. It's already begun, hasn't it? Ethan didn't respond. He just tapped his phone, then looked toward the street. A cruiser was pulling up, and the real story was about to begin. The police cruiser coasted to a stop. In front of Ethan's house, quiet and deliberate, like it didn't want to wake. The neighborhood, Officer Ray Mendoza stepped out, fixing his sunglasses as if it were still noon, not early evening. His partner, Officer Valdez, stayed behind the wheel, scanning the tablet that had already flagged the address with a note. Caller reports unauthorized gathering with possible foreign nationals. Across the street, Karen stood on her porch like a victorious general surveying a battlefield. She gave Officer Mendoza a wave, not a friendly one, a purposeful one. He ignored it. Ethan had already stepped outside, hands in his pockets, relaxed, but not indifferent. The air between him and the officer was still, yet charged, like the moment before a thunderclap. Evening. Sir, Mendoza began, approaching the steps. We received a report about a possible disturbance at this address. Ethan nodded. You're welcome to take a look, though I'd call it more of a peaceful dinner than a disturbance. Mendoza looked past him toward the open front door. Inside, glimpses of crisp suits, dignified posture, and quiet elegance drifted by like shadows in an embassy corridor. Karen crossed the street uninvited, arms folded, voice louder than needed. I told them, she said to Mendoza, this neighborhood isn't zoned for international business or whatever this is. Ethan didn't flinch. It's not international business, it's dinner, Karen scoffed, with flags and security details and translators. Mendoza kept his voice level. Ma'am, we'll take it from here. But Karen wasn't finished. You can't just bring in strangers and expect us not to notice. This isn't Washington. Mendoza turned back to Ethan. Do your guests have identification, sir? Ethan didn't move. Instead, a soft voice called from behind him. They do. Ambassador Imani stepped forward, poised and regal, holding a slim folder in her hand. She handed it to Mendoza with a calm that made Karen visibly tense. He opened. The folder blinked, then adjusted his stance. This is official. Imani smiled. We're here on an approved cultural diplomacy visit. Mr. Rivers is a former foreign envoy and a private host on the State Department's list of regional diplomatic liaisons. Karen froze. The words didn't register. Mendoza lowered the folder and looked up. So ... This is all legitimate. Ethan tilted his head. Would you like to see the event clearance code? It's already logged with your department. Check. Dispatch. Mendoza tapped his radio. Unit 114 to dispatch. Can you confirm clearance on 402 Maplewood guest registry? Possible diplomatic code filed. There was a pause. Static. Then a voice came through. Confirmed. Clearance valid. Guests are verified. State Department contacts logged 4 hours ago. Karen's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Her phone, still clutched tightly, buzzed. A new message from the HOA group chat. What's going on? Police really there? Why are there dignitaries on Ethan's lawn? Karen, what did you do? Mendoza looked at her. Ma'am, there's no violation here. I'd suggest giving your neighbor his evening back. Karen tried to salvage her moment, but they didn't notify the HOA. Imani turned to her. We weren't aware the HOA had jurisdiction over U.S. federal diplomatic relations. Todd appeared across the street, holding 2 mugs. He offered one to Karen. She didn't take it. Back on the porch, Ethan smiled politely. Would either of you officers care for a bite? We've got enough lamb for an army. Mendoza cracked the faintest grin. No thanks, sir. Enjoy your evening. As the cruiser rolled away, Karen remained rooted to the spot. Her eyes darted between the departing police, the calm diplomats, and her buzzing phone. Inside, Victor stood near the window, arms crossed. She called 911, he said flatly. Imani nodded. And now we know exactly who we're dealing with. Ethan closed the door behind them and picked up his phone. He didn't dial 911, he called someone else. The next morning arrived with the same quiet normalcy Maplewood Heights always wore like a mask. Sprinklers ticked rhythmically, lawnmowers hummed in the distance. But inside Karen Witherspoon's home, the air was heavy with irritation. She hadn't slept, not really. The images of last night played over and over in her head, police pulling away, guests laughing behind Ethan's front door, and that smug look on his face. It wasn't just defiance, it was confidence. That made her furious. She stood in front of her mirror, brushing her short blonde bob for the 3rd time. Downstairs, Todd was scrolling on his phone with a face that spelled trouble. You've seen it, haven't you? Karen asked. Todd didn't answer at first. Then he held up the phone. There it was. A clip from someone in the neighborhood. Just a 20-second video uploaded to a private community Facebook group. Karen storming up to the cruiser, gesturing wildly as Officer Mendoza calmly listened and then turned away from her to talk to Ethan. The caption read, When HOA Karen calls. 911 on foreign diplomats. Karen's eyes narrowed. This isn't over, she muttered. She opened her laptop and began typing a letter, not just an email. A formal complaint to the HOA board, requesting an emergency vote to restrict unregistered, foreign guests, citing community safety and sovereign zoning concerns. She used phrases like neighborhood integrity and non-domestic influence. She even bolded the term unauthorized gatherings. She hit send. Across the street, Ethan was having coffee on his porch. The morning light made his dark sweater look almost ceremonial. Ambassador Imani stepped out beside him, barefoot, sipping herbal tea. Victor remained inside, visible through the window, reading from a thick file. Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced down and gave a small, tired laugh. She's trying to pass a zoning clause on sovereign diplomacy, he said. Imani raised an eyebrow. That's a new level. He shook his head and stood. I called in that favor last night. They'll be here by noon. Is she ready for that? She asked. She started this. At 11:58, a black SUV with tinted windows turned onto Maplewood's main road. Gurn was on her porch, trimming fake flowers, when she spotted it. Her heart skipped. Different than the sedans from yesterday. This one had the kind of presence you felt before you saw it. It parked in front of Ethan's home. A man in a gray suit stepped out, followed by a woman with a leather folder. They didn't carry weapons. They carried weight. Karen dropped the shears. She watched as Ethan greeted the visitors with the same calm smile. They didn't enter his house. Instead, they walked toward the HOA office, located just 2 doors down, a converted 2-story unit owned by the neighborhoods. Original developer. Karen put on her shoes. Inside the HOA office, only 2 board members were the HOA president and Diane, who handled neighborhood communications. They weren't expecting federal visitors. The man in gray introduced himself with little flourish. My name is Adam Bell. I'm a liaison for the Bureau of Diplomatic Security. This is Associate Director Tran, from the Office of Foreign Missions. We're here regarding a recent call made to law enforcement about an active diplomatic visit. Ron blinked. Is there a problem? Diane asked. Bell looked at them calmly. It depends. When private citizens interfere with federally approved diplomatic visits, it can raise certain flags. And when a neighborhood organization begins drafting policies targeting foreign guests, well, that catches attention. Ron went pale. We didn't approve any new policy. That must have been a resident. Karen entered just in time to hear her name. Who's speaking about foreign guests? She asked, feigning confusion. Director Tran turned. You must be Mrs. Witherspoon. Karen straightened. I'm a concerned neighbor. These gatherings are happening without HOA input, and we have rules. Belle nodded. You do? But federal law ranks higher. If you'd like to file a formal complaint against the United States Diplomatic Registry, you're welcome to. But I'd advise legal counsel first. Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Ron looked like he wanted to crawl under the HOA welcome table. Belle handed him a document. This is a letter of advisory. Your HOA is now on temporary federal monitoring due to citizen interference in diplomatic operations. No new policies may be passed without our legal review until further notice. Karen stumbled back a step. You're joking. Director Tron's voice was cool. We don't joke in matters of international relations. The visitors walked out, as calmly as they'd arrived. The silence in the office was suffocating. Across the street, Ethan poured a second cup of coffee. Inside his home, Victor was already smiling. Karen sat frozen in her kitchen, hands clenched around her coffee mug like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. The HOA board's silence hadn't been comforting. No rally, no emergency meetings, not even a replied to her last email. Not after that so-called advisory letter landed. Now, every time she looked out her window, Ethan's house felt like a diplomatic bunker, and she, just a woman with a clipboard and no authority left. Todd hovered by the counter, flipping through the newspaper without reading a word. He finally said what he'd been holding in all morning. Maybe it's time to let this one go. Cute. Laugh was bitter. Let what go, Todd? A stranger brings in foreign agents to our street, and now I'm the one being told to back off. He didn't respond. She paced to the window. Another car was parked in front of Ethan's house. Subtle, and undoubtedly government-issued. This time it wasn't black, but navy blue. The man who stepped out was younger than the others, dressed in casual layers, but he carried the same quiet presence. She snapped a photo from behind the curtain. 10 minutes later, HOA group chat lit up again. Did the FBI really come yesterday? Are we under investigation, Karen? What's going on? She tapped out a long reply, but stopped before sending it. For once, she didn't know what to say. Across the street, Ethan and his guests weren't just entertaining, they were preparing something. A long table was being assembled in the backyard. White linen, glassware, flowers in mason jars. Karen watched through binoculars. It wasn't just any dinner. It looked ... official. Todd stood behind her. Looks nice, she spun. It's a show. A performance. They're trying to make me look like the villain, he shrugged. You did call the police on diplomats. She stared at him. You're supposed to be on my side. Meanwhile, inside Ethan's home, Imani scrolled through neighborhood posts. On her phone, she's still at it, she said, handing it to Ethan. Anonymous posts, warnings about foreign influence in residential zones. She even quoted zoning code that doesn't apply. Ethan glanced at it and then to Victor, who sat with a newspaper folded neatly on his lap. Victor spoke without looking up. She's not stopping, so we don't either. That afternoon, invitations began landing in every neighbor's mailbox. White envelopes hand-delivered. They read, "You are cordially invited to a cultural diplomacy evening, hosted at 402 Maplewood Lane, an open-door celebration of international community and neighborhood unity. No HOA approval needed. It was technically a private event, and legally untouchable." When Karen found her invitation taped to her front door, she tore it in half. "I'm filing a petition," she said to Todd. "If the board won't stop this, I will. I'll go house to house. This street is still ours." Todd didn't respond. By early evening, people began showing up. Residents who had never spoken to Ethan were now carrying wine, baked dishes, and open minds. Children played near a small art display curated by Victor, while Imani greeted each guest with charm and ease. Flags of various nations draped across string lights. Music floated through the air, nothing loud, just enough to give the night a pulse. Karen watched from behind her blinds, furious and speechless. Ron, the HOA president, arrived to... He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't leaving either. She stormed across the street, her presence loud without a word. Ethan turned as she approached. "You weren't invited," she snapped. "I believe you got yours," he said calmly. "I tore it up," he smiled. Symbolic. Karen's eyes darted across the yard, looking for a flaw, a noise violation, an excuse. There was nothing. "Enjoy your evening," Ethan said, before turning away to greet another guest. As Karen stood there, unsure what to do, someone tapped her on the shoulder. It was a woman she didn't recognize. Confident, wearing a red blazer and a badge tucked to her belt. "You're Karen Witherspoon." Karen hesitated. "Yes." The woman handed her a letter. "Office of Foreign Affairs. You're being formally informed of your presence in 2 federal incident reports. You are not under arrest, but you are advised to refrain from future interference with verified diplomatic functions. This is your final notice." Karen didn't speak. Her voice was gone. Behind her, someone clicked a photo. By morning, that photo would make its way around the neighborhood. Curran, holding a federal letter in one hand, standing awkwardly alone in a backyard party filled with people smiling without her. By Monday morning, Karen was back at it, clipboards, scowls, and determination wrapped in a pastel cardigan. The neighborhood may have been enjoying Ethan's global potluck party, but she saw right through it. She called it a smokescreen, a well-orchestrated distraction. And now, with her authority bruised but not broken, She had a new plan. She was going door to door. It's not about nationality, she said to one neighbor. It's about procedure, about order. You let one homeowner bypass the HOA once, and next thing you know, someone's building a water slide in their front yard. A few neighbors nodded politely. A few signed the paper to avoid conflict, but many didn't answer at all. Some peeked through blinds, watching her walk away. Others told her to come back later, and never opened the door. She returned home with 11 signatures, not enough to trigger a vote, not enough to stop anything. Todd stood at the door holding the mail. He didn't look pleased. You got another one, he said, holding out an envelope. She grabbed it like it was evidence in a case. This one wasn't from any agency. It was from Ethan. Inside was a single typed page. Dear Karen, you've made your views clear, but it's time the rest of us did too. This Friday, I'll be holding an open community meeting to discuss the future of Maplewood Heights and the role of diplomacy, tolerance, and neighborhood participation. You are welcome to attend. Or not. Bot warm regards. Ethan Rivers. The bottom. In smaller print, P.S. Food will be catered by the Embassy Kitchen. Victor insisted. Karen crushed the note in her hand. He's mocking me. Todd looked away. Maybe he's just trying to fix things. That afternoon, she returned to the HOA office unannounced. Ron was sitting at his desk with a soda and a half-eaten sandwich. He didn't stand when she entered. We need to vote on restrictions, she said. Ron looked tired. We can't, you know that. The federal oversight letter still stands. She slammed her clipboard on the table. That's because you let him throw that circus of a dinner. He leaned back. Everyone had a good time, Karen. Even Diane danced. And look, no noise complaints. No litter. Nothing out of order. I checked. She lowered her voice. They're manipulating the neighborhood. Ron folded his arms. Or maybe they're just nicer than you. That silenced her. Back across the street, Ethan was preparing. His backyard had been cleared, but not of guests of everything else. What remained was a podium, a sound system, and rows of folding chairs. A community meeting, casual in tone but heavy in meaning. Inside, Victor was on the phone. Yes, the press may come. One camera crew. No media badges. Just blend in. Imani was reviewing a guest list. Karen will show, she said. She can't not. Ethan sipped tea and nodded. And when she does, she hears something she doesn't expect. Friday came fast. The sun began to set, and residents trickled in, slower than for the last party, but still in surprising numbers. The mood wasn't festive. This was different. Quiet conversations, folded arms, curiosity mixed with caution. Karen watched from her porch for 30 minutes before finally stepping off the curb. She wore neutral colors, a sensible purse, and walked alone. She didn't wave at anyone. She didn't need to. Everyone noticed. Ethan stood at the podium as she arrived. His voice was calm, confident. I moved here for peace, but I also believe in community. So tonight isn't about pointing fingers, it's about building something better together. Karen rolled her eyes. Then Ethan turned to a small table. Near the stage, there's one item I'd like to bring forward. A motion not from the HOA, from the residents. He held up a folder. This is a neighborhood petition, signed by over 40 homeowners. Karen's stomach sank. He opened the folder. It's a request to formally dissolve Maplewood Heights' current HOA structure and replace it with a voluntary civic council, one that includes homeowner input, transparency, and no punitive enforcement without full majority vote. There was silence. Then someone in the crowd clapped. Then a few more. Karen's lips parted, but she couldn't find the words. Ethan smiled gently. No more surprise fees. No more surveillance. Just neighbors. Being neighbors. Karen stepped forward, her voice sharp. That's not how this works. You can't just dismantle the HOA with a clipboard and a speech. Ethan looked at her with kindness. That's what you tried to do, remember? And just like that, the crowd turned. Karen felt it. The shift. Not with shouts. Not with arguments. Just silence. And that silence said everything. Saturday morning was unusually quiet in Maplewood Heights. The kind of quiet that comes after something big has been said, but before the consequences catch up. Some residents were cautiously optimistic about the proposed changes. Others were nervous, but no one had heard a word from Karen. Until 9:42 a.m. That's when her HOA email account sent out a message to all residents with the subject line, "The truth behind Ethan Rivers and his international guests." Inside the email was a link to a long document, a manifesto of sorts. Karen had gone through Ethan's entire diplomatic history, news clippings, public records, blurry screenshots. She framed the dinner parties as covert meetings. She suggested that his guests were lobbying for foreign interests through casual neighborhood infiltration. She even accused Victor of falsifying embassy paperwork and referred to Imani as too polished to be harmless. But that wasn't what got everyone's attention. Attached to the email was a spreadsheet. The HOA's entire operating budget, every line item, every past year, every late fee collected, every vendor contract, and the personal reimbursement history of each board member, including Ron. That was the part people read twice. $1,274 for mailing supplies. Over a 3-month span, $2,800 for a new HOA meeting table, from an artisan craftsman in Vermont. Gas reimbursements. Miscellaneous HOA attire. Even catered lunches for two-person meetings. By 11:15, the residents' group chat was on fire. Why are we paying for Diane's dry cleaning? Is this real? This isn't about Ethan anymore. This is a full shakeup. Ron was the first to call a meeting, not at the HOA office. That was locked. He met with Diane and 3 other board members on his back patio with folded arms and furrowed brows. She wasn't supposed to have access to that file, Diane said, scanning her phone. She was treasurer last year. Ron replied, we never changed the passwords. Todd found Karen on the couch, laptop still open, a bowl of uneaten cereal beside her. They're going to come after you for this, he said softly. I don't care, she muttered. Let them, they deserve it. He sat down slowly. Karen, even if they did, this wasn't the way. She didn't answer. Back across the street, Ethan was reading the same email from a printed copy Victor slid across the breakfast table. She went nuclear, Victor said simply. Imani tapped her pen. That spreadsheet is real. Ethan nodded. Down to the penny. Then she didn't just lose the neighborhood, she said. She just lost the board. By afternoon, Ron issued a public response through the HOA's official newsletter, unusually fast turnaround. For a group that once took 4 weeks to vote on mailbox colors, we take these concerns seriously. Pending an internal review, all HOA board activities are suspended effective immediately. That meant no fees, no citations, no meetings. For the first time in Maplewood history, the HOA was silent. Karen had broken the machine, but it didn't bring her peace. That evening, her phone buzzed. Unknown number, she answered, a man's voice on the other end. Double quotes, Mrs. Witherspoon. This is Mark Langley, attorney for the Maplewood Heights Homeowners Association. I've been asked to notify you that a complaint has been filed. You've been accused of violating the data privacy provision in your former role as treasurer. Karen's throat tightened. Langley continued. You'll receive official documents this week. I suggest you retain counsel. The line went dead. She stared at the screen. It was still for a moment. Then a new message popped up from Ethan. Transparency comes at a cost. Let's talk before things get worse. She stared at the words for a long time. Then she typed a reply, and deleted it, and typed again. Sunday morning rolled in with a clouded sky, and a colder air than usual for spring. It wasn't the weather that felt different, it was the mood. No sprinklers, no morning joggers, no neighborly waves. Maplewood Heights was unusually still, like the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Karen hadn't left the house since the email blast. The blinds were drawn. The mailbox was full, but the noise online had grown louder by the hour. There was talk of an emergency town hall organized, not by the HOA, but by the residents themselves. The idea had been Ethan's, but it was gaining momentum without him even speaking much. It wasn't just about the foreign guests anymore. It was about what everyone suspected for years, but had never dared to confront. The HOA had been operating like a small-town empire, quiet, rigid, unquestioned, until now. At 3 p.m., the gathering began in the Maplewood Playground Park. Folding chairs were set in rows near the basketball court. No flags, no diplomats this time. Just homeowners, mothers, retirees, teachers, veterans, all holding printed pages from the leaked budget. There were murmurs of legal action, whispers of refunds. Someone brought a petition not to vote on policy, but to dissolve the HOA entirely. Ethan showed up late, intentionally. He didn't speak from a stage. He sat in the back row, nodded politely, and listened. That's when Karen arrived. She didn't sneak in. She walked right up the middle of the rows in a gray jacket, hair pinned tight, face unreadable. She didn't flinch as whispers stirred around her like ripples in a pond. Is she serious? Someone muttered. She's got nerve. Someone else added. Isn't she being sued? Karen stood before the crowd, clipboard in one hand, folded document in the other. When she spoke, the crowd quieted, not out of respect, but because they wanted to hear how far she'd go. I made mistakes, she began, her voice low but steady. I acted on impulse. I called the police. I sent a letter I shouldn't have. I leaked the budget, knowing full well it would cause chaos. She paused, but I don't regret pulling back the curtain. Some people shook their heads. A few crossed their arms. I may have been wrong about Ethan, she continued, but I was right about this board. We've paid fees for years, and no one asked where the money was going. That's on all of us. Double quotes. Diane stood from the second row. You're just trying to dodge liability. Karen looked at her. Maybe, but I'm not hiding from it. I'll accept the consequences. But so should everyone else who's been signing reimbursements for furniture no one saw and charging dinners to an HOA card. The air was thick with tension. That's when Ethan stood. He walked slowly to the center, not to challenge her, but to face the crowd alongside her. I didn't come here to divide this neighborhood, he said. I came here because after years of diplomacy overseas, I wanted to find peace. I found fences, rules, fear. He looked around. But now I see something better. People asking questions, people waking up. That's more valuable than any title on a committee. Someone clapped. Then another. Then a woman in the front stood and asked, So what happens now? Ethan turned to Karen. I've got an idea, but it involves her. Karen looked at him warily. You said you wanted transparency, he said, so, help us build it. Not as HOA president. Not as an enforcer. Just as a neighbor who knows what not to do next time. The crowd was stunned. Karen even looked like she'd forgotten how to blink. I'm not sure I'm welcome, she said. That depends, Ethan said. Are you willing to listen for once? She looked down at her clipboard, then handed it to a young mother nearby. I think I'll start with that. There was no applause, no dramatic cheer, just quiet acceptance. The kind that builds slowly and lasts longer than noise. But as the crowd dispersed, one man stood up, Otran, the former HOA president, watching from a distance, and he wasn't clapping. 1 week after the town hall, in the park, Maplewood Heights was still in limbo. HOA board had officially stepped down, and for the first time in years, no one was enforcing mailbox paint shades or yard gnome restrictions. Some neighbors celebrated, some were cautious, but most were simply watching and waiting. Ethan had kept a low profile since the gathering. He hadn't thrown another dinner, hadn't spoken at another meeting. He'd gone back to tending his garden and walking his dog, like none of this had ever happened. But change wasn't finished with Maplewood. On Friday morning, thick manila envelopes arrived in every resident's mailbox, signed, unmarked, and anonymous. Inside was a flyer titled, The Emergency Bylaw Reinstatement Plan, drafted and endorsed by concerned community leaders. It was a detailed plan to reinstate the HOA under new leadership with Ron at the helm. Buried deep in the wording was a clause giving sweeping emergency authority to legacy board members to restructure committees without a vote for the sake of neighborhood stability. Karen got her copy and read it twice. This smells like Ron, she said to Todd, who had already tossed his into the recycling bin. At 3 p.m., a suspiciously sleek table was set up at the park entrance, complete with clipboards, pens, and a folding sign that said, Community Restoration Vote. Today only. People came, out of curiosity or concern. Some signed without reading. Others asked too many questions and were told they could read it later. A few who had spoken out against the HOA last week were told politely but firmly that their signatures were not required this time by 4 p.m. Karen was standing across the street with a hard stare. I should have known Ron wouldn't. Take this lying down, she said. Ethan walked up beside her, holding a reusable grocery bag and a puzzled look. They're calling it a vote, he said, but no one seems to know who's counting. She nodded. It's not a vote. It's a takeover with paper and folding chairs. Together, they crossed the street. Ron was standing at the center of it all, like a politician without a podium. He saw them coming and didn't flinch. Mr. Chance, Ron said to Ethan, you and your dinner parties made a mess of this place. I'm just cleaning it up. Ethan kept his voice calm. You mean by pushing emergency bylaws without a resident forum, it's all legal? Ron replied. The old charter allows for emergency restructuring in case of board collapse. Karen folded her arms. The board didn't collapse. Ron, it quit. Big difference. Ron smirked. Maybe I've made mistakes, but unlike you two, I know how to run a community. That's when Ethan reached into his grocery bag and pulled out a folder of his own. Inside, a notarized motion signed by over 70 residents. It was a demand for an open election, a full reset with third-party oversight from the county's Neighborhood Affairs Council, who had already agreed to mediate if called. Ron's smirk faded. This is a joke, he muttered, but it wasn't. 2 county representatives were already walking up the sidewalk in navy windbreakers with clipboards of their own. Maplewood Heights. One of them asked, We're here to observe. Who's leading this vote? Ron stepped back. I was told. Ethan handed them the folder. It's all in there. Within 20 minutes, the emergency vote table was dismantled. The flyers were collected, and Ron left without a word. Karen stood beside Ethan, watching the last clipboard get loaded into a county car. Did you plan all of this? She asked. Ethan shrugged. Diplomacy works best when people don't see it coming. Karen gave a soft laugh. The first real one in a long time. Across the street, Victor sat on Ethan's porch, sipping tea and watching it all unfold like a matinee. What now? Karen asked. Ethan looked around the street. Now we build something better. Together. Karen nodded slowly. You think they'll ever forgive me? They already have, he said. They just haven't realized it yet. That night, porch lights came on early. Kids rode bikes again. A neighbor waved to Karen. She hesitated, then waved back, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like it belonged to the people who actually lived there. No fines, no threats, no fear, just neighbors.